If you look at LBJ, President Johnson is proof that you can have some deeply bigoted beliefs and still manage to do good, but that part of the challenge is navigating through and finding who you really are. If you look at President Obama, of course, but you look at Michelle, who hasn't run for a single office, but is emblematic of the kind of smarts and grace that you can have to create change. Look at Shirley Franklin. Look at, and again, I tend to think of it as a collage. I put together people who have different skills, different attributes. Maynard Jackson, who hired me when I was in college to work for him, I've looked at all of them, and they all come with their own faults. They come with their successes. They come with deep-seated challenges, but they also have each demonstrated a willingness to create change and improve lives. I lived in Texas during the last years of Ann Richards. Those kinds of women in particular, but people who share my values, people who've lived those values, and people who've been defeated by choices that they've made, but have learned how to rebound and how to make better choices. Those are all things you need to know if you want to do this kind of work. Because the bottom line is there hasn't been a woman who has done what I want to do, a Black woman, in the country. And so there isn't a clear person for me to follow. I know what she did to get this job. So for me, the opportunity is to build something, pulling together what I've learned from others, but also to reach out to the community and say, what do you need to see? How do I do this best? How do I make certain that when I'm elected, I'm ready to serve you?
And I would ask you, what's your opinion on last week where the president, he signed on releasing the TPS, which was a travel protection, because I'm from Haiti, I have family members that was under that protection system.
I wrote a letter. I was part of a letter writing campaign of leading politicians calling on Congress and the president to maintain TPS. I think it's a critical issue, one that's been underreported, and we have an affirmative obligation as the United States to provide protections, especially in nation states where we know that the challenges that led to TPS continue to exist.
And with the hurricanes that took place within the past few months in Houston, in Florida, and Puerto Rico.
And the Virgin Islands.
And the Virgin Islands, correct. Puerto Rico and Houston, they still in shambles. How do we correct that problem?
I'm from the Gulf Coast. My family's from the Gulf of Mexico and Mississippi. My parents were hit hard by Hurricane Katrina. It took 5 years for those communities to really get back. I mean, it took my parents almost 2 years to get the insurance settlement to put the roof back on their house and clear the black mold out. We have a strong emergency response system in America, but we have a unfortunately weak long-term response, because the reality is devastations like hurricanes and tornadoes aren't momentary events. They literally destroy communities. And if it took a while to build a community the first time, there's no reason to think it won't take long the second time. And so I believe that we have to have a more consistent approach that understands the long-term implications of storms, and that we can't simply show up for a couple of weeks and think our work is done. But we also have to prepare people to understand that once those storms happen, it is going to take a while. And the responsibility that we have both as leaders but also as members of community is to be consistent in our engagement and in our service, and to provide those pathways for people to rebuild their lives.
Would you say, taking you back, would you say as a child that you envision you being in this predicament where you're at right now?
When I was young, I didn't know what the governor did, but I knew that I thought government was important, because I asked my parents, why is it that we are volunteering and doing all this service work? Shouldn't there be somebody else doing it? And they said it's called government. And I realized government wasn't doing its job as effectively as I should. And I kept missing the super friends. And this is before, young people don't understand this, but it only came on once. You missed it on Saturday, it was gone.
Forget about it.
Exactly. So I had a very early interest in why government wasn't doing its job. But where I credit my parents is that they were always intentional about us learning. So when I asked that question, I started learning more about what government should do, what politics is. It wasn't until college that I became, right before college and then in college, where I became more involved in politics. But running for governor has been important to me for a while because I understand that we know what a mayor does. We know what a president does. But too often the communities that need a good governor are the least aware of what the governor does. And in Georgia, the governor has such extraordinary opportunity for change. I despise poverty. I think it is immoral. I think it's economically inefficient. I think it's mean. And I think it's solvable. And the reality is we have refused to solve it. We take that passage in the Bible that the poor will always be among us as an excuse for inaction. And I see it as a call to arms. We have to do the work. We have to figure out ways to solve it. And what I understood in the last 20 years was that the governor is where you get that work done. The governor has the ability to help implement policies. Don't think about it across a range of issues. Because it's not just urban poverty, it's rural poverty. It's suburban poverty, because the suburbs are some of the poorest places in America now. And it's making certain that we are constantly thinking not just about how do you disrupt poverty, but how do you create prosperity? Because that's the antidote. It's not just let me get you above the poverty line. I want to make sure that you can't even see it from where you stand. That's the mission we have to have.
And as a small business owner that you are, how would you... What actions do you intend to take on helping small black business owners? Because, as black people, it's been very hard getting government grants.
Absolutely.
It's been hard to even get the location that you want to build up to start your business. How would you combat that to help that community?
Georgia gets credit for being the number one place to do business. What we mean, though, is it's the number one place for business relocation for large companies. When you look at small businesses, what we call Main Street entrepreneurship, of the top 25 states, Georgia's number 22. And the challenge there is it's access to capital. It is understanding how that capital works. It's having the training and having access to workers who can take those jobs. But it's also just being able to navigate the systems to get access to contracts, to get bonded for the jobs that you want. Those are all solvable problems, but it begins with access to capital. After the collapse of the economy in 2008, when banks rebounded, the problem is that more than 90%, and I think my numbers are correct, more than 90% of the banks that would serve small businesses, especially small black businesses in low-income communities, disappeared. They got eaten up by those larger banks in part of the major restructuring. Well, if you want access to capital, you usually go to a bank that knows you, who's willing to take a risk on you. I don't know of a major bank that is willing to take that kind of risk because they don't know the community. They don't know the people there. And a lot of the government programs like the SBA loans, Small Business Administration loans, those go through those banks. And so if you can't get a bank to actually approve you, the fact that the loans exist are irrelevant if you can't get one of those loans. As governor, I would want to make certain that we expand access to those programs, that we put more of the resources into community development financial institutions. They're called CDFIs. They are more locally based, that we use credit unions more aggressively for this work, that we engage those small business owners who've been successful in these communities, especially black-owned businesses, to say what worked for you and what didn't work. My company, Now Account, I started it with two business partners, and what we've done with that company is we've moved hundreds of millions of dollars in access to capital through a payment solution. We help small businesses get access to capital by buying their invoices. And that's a critical issue because for a lot of small businesses, it's not that they don't have customers, it's that they can't get their customers to pay. And so it's figuring out what are the other problems. We solved one problem, but there are other problems that are facing black businesses. They're facing Latino businesses. They're facing Asian American businesses. They're facing white businesses. They're small businesses. Across the board, we need to make certain that we are always providing access to capital, but they're also understanding what is the impediment and then stepping in where it makes sense. Some folks push back on that and say, small businesses, that's not the government's job. we know the government is involved in capital because we give tax incentives. We do all of this economic development work. That's what I'm talking about. We just have to scale it down for small businesses, especially Black-owned businesses and minority-owned businesses and disadvantaged businesses, to make sure that they can serve the communities where they live. Because here's the thing. In the private sector, 44% of private sector jobs are small business jobs, which means if you don't solve this, half of the private sector jobs that we need to support are not going to come into being. And so what I want to make certain we are constantly doing is building the capacity of small businesses to build their communities. Because we know when you have strong, thriving small businesses and communities, the whole community does well. But if those businesses suffer and struggle, so does the community. So we want to improve communities. We want to improve Black communities. We have to invest in their businesses early. We have to invest in them consistently. And we have to believe that they are the engine for how you transform those places.
And do you see a possibility where we can recreate Black Wall Street, like in Tulsa, Oklahoma, like in North Carolina, like in down in Auburn Avenue?
I think that there is a path to create prosperity across communities. The difference is that part of what created Black Wall Street was exclusion. We weren't allowed to be everywhere. And I never want to recreate that because we should always think of diversity as our strength and not a weapon. But part of that strength is making certain that our communities are prosperous, and that prosperity is our mission, not an afterthought, but the mission that we undertake, and that's what I'm committed to. I work down the street from Auburn Avenue. In fact, one of the nonprofits I started, we actually had a location on Auburn Avenue, and what I understand is that there's so much opportunity in that area, but we have to be willing to do the work. We have to be willing to make the investment. One thing that I've done as a candidate is I've put out the Advanced Energy Jobs Plan, because one of our challenges, especially among Black-owned businesses, is that we have to diversify the kind of businesses we have. Renewable energy is one of those opportunities. You can create 45,000 jobs in Georgia, between 25 and 45,000 jobs, looking at solar, wind, hydro, and biomass. Those are jobs that aren't just about high tech. It's about installation. It's about making sure that we are doing accounting and sales. So you can start those small businesses that are selling those solar panels, that are installing them in homes. You've got Black farmers down in Mitchell County that have basically leased their land for these solar panels. They're making money. But we have to be thinking beyond the traditional business models and think about how can we expand access and opportunity. And that's one of the reasons for the Advanced Energy Jobs Plan, because I want us to think about diversifying not only who has the money, but how we make that money, because that's how you grow communities.
And what would you tell the next generation that's coming behind? What inspiration, you could use yourself as an inspiration to them. What would you tell these wonderful folks, these young people?
I'm running for governor of Georgia because I believe that we have an opportunity for transformation, that we can make Georgia a place where everyone has opportunity and where no one gets left behind. I want to win this race because I am the most qualified person. I want to win this race because I am the best suited to do the work on day one. I've run small businesses. I've run organizations. I've solved problems in the legislative space, in the public space, and the private sector space. But I also can't ignore the fact that I look different. And I think that's a critical conversation, because I want to change what the face of leadership looks like. Because if you want to inspire people, let them believe that they are capable of more. And I want people to see me, to see this campaign, to hear the way I talk about the work I want to do, and to know I mean it. But also that I think anyone can do this. If you're willing to do the hard work, if you're willing to make the investment, if you're willing to work together, if I can change the face of what leadership looks like, then hopefully I can inspire more to know that they can do the same.
And as we wrap up this interview, I'm going to pose this last question to you. After you win and you serve your 4 years, will you run again for another 4 years?
It would be my honor to serve as long as the state of Georgia will have me and as long as the Constitution will let me.
Well,